Good morning, folks, and thank you all for coming. If you've taken the time out of your day to be here, you know how important this topic is and the issues that this forum will address, so I won't belabor that. Before I get into the reason I'm here, which is to introduce our next guest, Chris Evans, I want to take a moment to thank John for what he's done over the last 15 years as chairman of the LSC board corporation. Frank Strickland and his board laid a great foundation, but when we came along in 2010, I think it's fair to say that there was some improvements that were possible. One of the things I told the ABA when I was being interviewed for the job after my nomination was that I wanted to see that Legal Services Corporation and the work it does for its grantees was done in a fair and efficient manner. And I think we've done great strides in making that happen. We created a fiscal task force that sort of oversaw our accounting practices and the way our grants were awarded, the way our grants were supervised, and the way our staff interacted with our grantees. I know that sometimes grantees have a love-hate relationship with the LSC board, but I like to think that we've made life by and large better for the 130 organizations that we help fulfill their own missions. And John Levy, nobody was more of a warrior in that regard and more tireless in his efforts and continues to be today. So thank you, John, for all of your leadership. I'm going to introduce Chris Evans, who is a tireless public servant here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Before I do that, I want to lay a little groundwork for the whole topic of the opioid crisis in Kentucky, our efforts to combat it and ultimately to abate it and help all of the people who have been affected by it. It's no exaggeration to say that opioid addiction and the consequences of that for the individuals involved and their families and their communities has been one of the most devastating illnesses to come along in decades. And if you're a legal aid lawyer or grantee employee, you know that it affects nearly every aspect of the lives and the families of those people involved, because they lose their jobs, they lose their homes, sometimes they lose their children, they are incarcerated, they are homeless, and the whole panoply of issues that the opioid crisis raises are the issues that legal aid grantees address. In 2019, John's already mentioned our opioid task force, which I was co-chair of. In 2019, when Daniel Cameron was elected Attorney General, he asked me to come into the office and head up the civil side of his office. And I was a partner practicing law here in Louisville, and I thought, I've never really had much interest in state government. But it was an interesting proposition, and Daniel Cameron was a compelling individual, and so I said yes. I didn't quite realize at the time that the opioid crisis was front and center in the responsibilities of that job. I was sworn in at 10 o'clock on December 17th, 2019 as the Assistant Deputy Attorney General, and at 10:30 that morning, I sat down with Attorney General Cameron, our Deputy Attorney General Barry Dunn, and the outside counsel who had been hired by Attorney General Andy Beshear to represent the Commonwealth in pursuing the lawsuits against the opioid manufacturers, the opioid distributors, ultimately the pharmacies, and all the other players involved in making the crisis what it was. There was a lot of pressure on General Cameron to fire those lawyers because, frankly, they'd been hired by Andy Beshear. And there were a lot of people on the Republican side of the legal world who thought, A, plaintiffs' lawyers should never be hired by the Attorney General's office, and B, the lawsuits were somehow a sham. We spent 3 or 4 months actually working with and interviewing and doing due diligence with those counsel, and ultimately decided to keep them, and to keep them with even more support than they previously had. I spent the better part, probably the majority of my time for the first year, 2020, when I wasn't fighting Governor Beshear on his excessive use of emergency powers, I was supporting Governor Beshear's efforts to bring about the end of the opioid crisis. And ultimately, we brought in over $900 million in settlements. Attorney General Russell Coleman has added another at least $100 million in settlement money to that fund. And we created, with the legislature, the Opioid Abatement Commission that Chris Evans is the head of today. And that commission gave half of the money to the counties and cities to do with as they wished based on their own priorities, and half of the money to the commission to administer to make grants to the various organizations that were deserving. And I think it's true from the very beginning of our awards that each of our grantees has received at least one award annually from the Opioid Abatement Commission money. And I'm actually pretty proud of that because it was something that I thought was important. So that's, sort of the background. I met Chris Evans, I think in 2022, 23. We were at an opioid abatement town hall hearing in Corbin. And Chris, who had been the director, the special agent in charge of the Drug Enforcement Agency here in Louisville at the time, and I think he'd spent 28 years with the DEA, was at that town hall. And I was pleased to meet Chris then and to stay in touch with him over the next couple of years. And when Attorney General Coleman was elected, General Coleman had the good sense to hire Chris to be the director of the Opioid Abatement Commission created by the state legislature. Chris has, like I said, been an amazing public servant. He continues to be an amazing public servant in administering the program, the hundreds of millions of dollars that are so important to abating this crisis. And I'm so pleased and privileged to be able to introduce to you all today Director Chris Evans.
Good morning. Thank you. I was worried I was going to have to drag that out of you a little bit, so this early in the morning. First of all, thank you to LSC for the opportunity to be here with you today, and most importantly, thank you to all of you for the work that you do. On behalf of the Commission and its staff, we recognize the importance of what you do, the critical role you play in our communities in helping to create and maintain vibrant and healthy communities. And so I want to make sure you know that we all appreciate your work and want to thank you on behalf of that. I'm just going to cover three brief things to be clear, but as it relates to the Commission and the work we do, we are an opportunity to support organizations across the Commonwealth. And one of the key aspects of what we look at and try to consider and try to make sure we support is the ability to sustain efforts to help organizations and efforts that benefit communities take root. One of the things that's critically important is that we don't want to waste those critical funds which come from such an area of pain and things that aren't going to take hold. and we've looked at the legal aid and understand the role that it takes in terms of supporting individuals, supporting communities, and making sure that things can take root in communities and can grab hold and continue to deliver services to people who are in need. The second thing that I want to make sure it's clear is there is a clear role and a clear understanding on the importance of second chance opportunities and removing barriers for people in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The Commonwealth has made great strides in improving, but we need to continue to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be the best version of themselves and bring to our communities their best skills and their best talents. That's what we try to support. That's what we want to make sure happens. And as LSC continues that work and continues those things, I want to make sure that that's clear to you that that's part of what we're trying to support. Second chance hiring, removing barriers is God's work. I know that's a strange thing to say. I used to live in California, and I might have phrased it a little differently, but I'm in Kentucky now, so I can phrase it that way. You've got to understand that we look at it, and I personally look at it as making sure that people have the opportunity to contribute. Having that opportunity gives people value like nothing else does. It gives them a belief in themselves, gives their families belief in them, gives them dreams, has them buy into the hope that they can help make places better, safer, stronger, and more of what they dream for it to be. That's what we want to support the commission. That's the work that we want to do. And I say that, it's one thing you could say, well, I've heard that somewhere, I've seen those sorts of things. But I want to make sure that it's also clear that everyone has a role to play in that. It does not matter what individuals' titles are. It does not matter what their positions are. I have talked to receptionists who I've said, do you understand how important your role is? You are the first voice that people hear about our organization. By you directing a call to the right places, you have changed somebody's day. You have changed what they're going through. You are important. And so I want to make sure you're clear. Everybody in this fight, everybody who's involved in this, everybody who is here has real and valuable importance to the work to keeping healthy communities. When you do the work that you do, it's like, the old adage, you throw a rock into a pond and you watch the ripples go and what that looks like as it goes across. When you change one life, when you give assistance to one person, you're not just giving assistance to that one person, you're giving assistance to generations. And I speak from that not from a place of an academic response of what this looks like. I am one of those beneficiaries. Now, it's not through the legal aid services, but I grew up in a family where my grandfather was a Baptist minister who died when my father was 6 years old. My father came up in a very hard life, very difficult ways. And along his path, as I grew older and we had conversations about what he encountered, I learned there were people who poured themselves into him along the way. And in doing so, when he had some tough choices to make and had to take on a career and actually join the military during the war as a way to feed the family, he made decisions based on those things he had learned that not only altered his life, but they altered the generations of my family. I have benefited, my brothers benefited, my nieces, my nephews. There is a ripple effect from what people poured into my grandfather and to my father that has seen generational change in my family. So I ask you all, as you are here for this, as you continue to move forward, please continue those things that pour into others, the great work you are doing because you are creating generational change. Don't think about the one person who's in front of you or the one conversation or the one meeting. The work you do, giving people hope, giving them a chance, giving them an opportunity, pours into them, pours into our future, and helps us build safe and healthy communities. So I want to thank you all for the work you're doing. Thank you for being here. Thank LSC for the opportunity to be with you today. So thank you very much.